Miss Julianne here. Today I'm going to be walking us through how we can make a paper plate weaving. So there's so many different ways that you can do this. Some ideas are to make a sunrise or a rainbow in the sky, or right now I'm going to walk us through how we can make a sunset. So you can pick which version you want to make, and I'm going to walk us through the steps and the materials that we need. So to start, you're going to need something to make your background with. So I'm going to be using markers, but if you would rather, you could use paint or a different material. You're going to need yarn. For my sunset, I'm only going to be using yellow, but if you want to use different colors, you can choose whatever you would like. You're going to need some tape. You're going to need a pair of scissors, and you're going to need your plate. So I have already made some of the steps for this. So I have already cut my plate. So throughout this video, I'm going to ask you to pause a couple times to catch up to the spot that I'm at. Also, if I'm not working at a great pace for you, you can pause at any time, or you can just move on past me. So I'm going to have you pause here, and you can cut your paper plate. So you just need it to be about half, just so that you have this shape. So I'll wait here, and you can come back when you're ready. So now that you have your half of a plate, you're going to make your background. So you can be super creative with this and make it however you would like. For some reference, for my sunset, this is what I made. So I made some hills that come together, and then use pink, orange, purple, and blue to make my sunset sky. So I was really inspired by a sunset that I saw yesterday, and so these were the colors that I saw in the sunset. So you can choose any colors you would like. You can have hills or mountains, a field, a backyard, whatever you would like for your landscape. Some tricks that you might want to think about are something you can see in my sunrise is I made my hills come together so that it kind of looks like the sun is rising up over the hills. And so that's kind of what I did here as well. So I made my hills meet in the middle, and they kind of curve off to the side. If that's something that you would like as well. So I'm going to have you pause here while you make your background. When your background is done, you can press play. All right, so now that your background is all filled in and ready to go, we're going to make some notches. So again, I'm going to show you my sunrise one. And as you can see, you're going to need the yarn to somehow attach to the plate. So you're going to cut little notches. So I have already done this as well, and I'm going to let you know how I did it. So as you're working, you're going to want this to be the bottom of your plate. That's what I'm going to call the bottom. And I'm going to call this curving edge the top of the plate. So starting at the bottom of your plate, you're going to cut a notch in the middle of this bottom straight edge. So as you can see, I have a notch, and my notch kind of goes to where the pink sky meets the green hills. But if your background is different, you just want a notch that's, about 1/2 inch to 1 inch going up towards the top of your plate. Then you're going to make another notch directly opposite. So here, right here is my bottom notch, and then you're going to make another notch with your scissors right here at the top. So you can see they're across from each other. And again, you want it to be about 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Then you're going to make 2 more notches on the lower sides of the curving edge of your plate. So for me, I made my notches around where the green meets the pink on both sides. But again, if yours is different, you just want your notch to be about an inch roughly from the bottom edge of your plate up the curve. So here's one, and here's the other. Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna move up the side and you're gonna make another notch. Same on this side. So for me, I made my notches where the blue meets the purple. And as you can see, it's not exactly the same spot on my sides of the plate, and that's okay. And then I made another notch a little bit above that and a little bit above that. So you have your notch at the bottom, your notch at the top, and then 3 notches on either side of your middle notch. And again, they don't have to be the same distance apart. You just want to have a total of 7 notches along the curving edge of the plate and 1 in the middle at the bottom. So I'm going to have you pause again now, and once you've cut your 8 total notches, you can press play again. Alright, so now that we all have our notches in our plate, we're going to need our yarn. So I am going to move my markers out of the way. And I'm going to get my yarn. So if you would like to, you can pre-cut your yarn. And you'll just want to have a good amount, probably if you're measuring it, at least a couple feet, a couple rulers length. Or if you have your whole ball of yarn, you don't have to cut it just yet. Mine is pre-cut. So you're going to want to find one end of your yarn and bring it to the back of your plate. So we're going to find where my notch is, and I'm going to kind of lay my yarn up over the notch so that it's facing up towards the curving edge, just like this. And then I'm going to get a piece of tape and just tape my yarn above the notch, facing up. Press it down a little bit. Now you can see, here's my notch, and I taped my yarn a little bit above it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the yarn gently through my bottom notch and flip the plate over. So now you're going to want to start with one of the bottom notches closest to the straight edge. So I'm going to start on this side, and I'm going to pull my yarn over and into this notch. So as you can see, I want to pull the yarn tight enough that it stays straight. I do not want it to be, loose and touching the bottom of the plate. I want it to be tight enough that it's straight. But I also don't want it to be so tight that you pull this off or that the plate starts ripping or pulling. Just tight enough that it stays straight. So now the yarn is at the back of my plate, and I'm going to bring it back to the center notch. I'm going to bring it back in just like we did before. I'll turn my plate around, and now the yarn's at the front again. So now I'm going to find the notch that's above the one we just went into. So here's my next notch, and I'm going to pull the yarn through there. And again, I'm going to bring it back through this middle notch. So every time you bring the yarn through the side, you're going to bring it back and around through the middle. So we're going to keep going around the circle in order of notches. So my next notch is this one. So I'm going to pull the yarn through, come around to the back, pull it up through the middle, and here it's at the front again. My next notch, pull it back, around through the middle. Here's my next notch. Pull it up and through, around through the back. Find my next notch, pull it through, bring it from the back to the front. Find my last notch over here and pull it through. Now this time, going through the last notch, you're not going to bring the yarn through the middle this time. I'm going to lay my plate down and I'm going to just lay my last thread of yarn kind of over where all the other yarns come together near the notch. I'm going to take one more piece of tape and I'm going to tape this tail now over all this area so that all these pieces can stay together and stay secure. So now, with this tail taped down, I'm going to cut it so that's not so long. And now the thread is all secure. So now you have something like this on the front. And you can kind of see how if you're also making a sun, that these kind of look like the rays of light that come out of the sun. So the next piece of what we're going to do is begin actually weaving our yarn around these pieces of yarn that we've already put in place. So you're going to take some yarn, and for this you're also going to want probably a couple feet of yarn, but if you don't cut enough in the beginning, it's okay. You can always add more yarn using the same steps that we're going to use right now. So you're going to pick one end of the yarn and you're going to tie it to one of the lower strands of yarn. So I'm going to pick this one. And I'm just going to tie this. So if you can see, I'm just going to tie my new thread onto this bottom thread. And depending on what kind of yarn you have, you might want to have a couple knots to secure it. For mine, I just need one knot. So as you can see, I've made one knot on this thread. So now you're going to find the other end of your yarn and you're going to weave it around. One tip that can be helpful is if your yarn starts to fray, you can wrap a piece of tape around the end to keep it together, and it might help you weave through. So now we're going to follow a weaving pattern of going under and over the threads. So we've already tied to this bottom thread. So now the next thread we're going to work with is this one. So we're going to go over and then under. So we're going to go over this piece and under this piece. So over and under, and we're going to come up right after it. I'm going to pull that through gently. And then we're going to keep going around with the same pattern. So here's the thread that I just came up from under. So we're going to go over, under. So over, and then under and come up. And pull that through. And then we left off going under here. So we're going to go over and then under. So over and under. So now, to make sure that we get all of these strands included in our sun, even though we already went over this one or under this one, we're going to go back over it now. So here is my piece coming out from under, and we're going to go back over and under. So we're going to keep following that pattern. So over this piece, under this piece. I'll pull that up. And now you're going to keep going around. So we left off here, so we're going to go over, under. Over, under. And now, even though we're going over this piece next, we're also going to wrap the yarn around so that this one stays included. So we're over this one, and then we're going to loop back under and come back up on the other side of it, so that we've gone around that bottom piece. And if your tail, like mine, is getting in the way from when you tied it on, you can tuck that into the notch or just put it off to the side. So this is what we just did. We just looped that yarn around right there. And now we're going to keep going around. So that one we just came from under. So we're going to go over, under. You're going to keep doing that all the way around until you have as much as you'd like. So I'm going to keep working around, and if you need to pause or go back and hear the instructions again, you can do that at any time. So I'm just going to keep going over and under and over and under, back and forth to make my sun. So I still have quite a bit more yarn, so I'm going to keep going around over and under a couple more times. And you can decide how big you want to make your sun. If you're making a rainbow with this, you're going to want to start with the color that you want on the bottom first. So once I get to the end of this row, I'll show you that. So when I made my rainbow, I started with purple, and then I did blue, then green, then yellow, then orange, and then I did red last. So as you're making this, you're going to start from the bottom and work up. Just like I did when I worked on my ground, I did the bottom first, and then I made my sun moving up. So I'm just going to go around a couple more times to get a little bit more sun, and then I'm going to show you how you can finish it off. And sometimes my yarn gets caught in my notch. You can just carefully pull it back out from there so that it doesn't pull the rest of your weaving too much. So you can start seeing that the shape of the sun is starting to show up a little bit more. So you can kind of see how it looks like a sunset, with these being the rays of light coming out. So, just going to finish my last couple of rows with you. and then we'll finish it off and we'll be able to decide what we want to do with our paper plate weaving. All right, so I'm gonna have my sunset be this big because the sunset I saw yesterday was happening when the sun was really close to going down. So I'm gonna say that mine is all ready to be finished off. So what you wanna do is you wanna try to finish so that your piece of yarn is close to one bottom side. Because what we're gonna do is I'm gonna tie the end of my yarn that I didn't use to this bottom piece of yarn, just like I did when I started over here. So in the same way that I did it before, I'm just gonna tie a knot around this piece of yarn. Just to make sure it's nice and secure. And usually when I finish, I usually like to do a couple of knots instead of just one, like when I start, to make sure it doesn't all unravel. But if it works better for you, you can also use a little bit of glue at the end to hold it in place, or hot glue or tape. So now I have this long tail again. So I'm just gonna cut this tail, and then you can do a couple of things with it. You can either just tuck it into the back. My tail's a little long so you can still see it. If your tail's really long, you can tuck it into your notch. You can try and weave it back in, or you can also make your knot a little bit smaller, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut the tail a little smaller. And then just kind of tuck it into the back. And there we go. Now I've got my sunset, my woven sun with a nice background. You can see how it kind of looks like it's setting into the hills. So I hope you had fun working on that. If you're still finishing up, that's great. And I hope to see what you make at some point. Thanks, everybody.